Tonight we explore what happens inside the brain when a person sits still for thousands of hours across many years. Not days, not weeks, years. Monks who practice long-term meditation show measurable structural changes in regions tied to attention, emotion, and self-awareness. These changes aren't metaphorical. They appear on brain scans as thicker cortical layers, altered white matter pathways, and shifted patterns of electrical activity. Over the next 2 hours, we will move through 100 observations about how sustained contemplative practice reshapes the living tissue of the nervous system. You've probably noticed at some point in your life how a repeated habit starts to feel automatic. Your fingers find the right keys on a keyboard without you thinking about it. A familiar drive home seems to get shorter over the months, even though the distance hasn't changed. That ease, that sense of fluid motion where there once was effort, is the surface expression of something happening deep inside your skull. Physical connections between neurons are being rewired. Now consider that same process applied not to typing or driving, but to the act of paying attention itself, to the regulation of emotion, to the deliberate, sustained practice of sitting still and watching the mind. That's what monks do, not for a weekend retreat, for decades. And the changes that result from this kind of practice are among the most pronounced structural brain adaptations ever documented in living human beings. There's a psychiatrist named Dr. Alok Kanogia, known to many as Dr. K, who spent 7 years training as a monk before completing his medical education. He bridges two traditions that rarely speak to each other: Eastern monastic discipline and Western neuroscience. His perspective will appear throughout these observations, alongside findings from neuroimaging labs and decades of contemplative research. The brain you're using right now, the one absorbing these words, is the same organ that will spend the next 2 hours learning about itself. It's changing even now. Let's begin with the basic machinery of neural change. Fact 1. Your brain contains roughly 86 billion neurons. Each of these cells can form thousands of connections with its neighbors. The junctions where connections happen are called synapses, small gaps typically 20 to 40 nanometers wide, where one neuron releases chemical messengers that drift across to receptors on the next cell. A single cubic millimeter of cortical tissue contains about 4 kilometers of neural wiring. That's a length greater than most people walk in a morning, packed into a space smaller than a grain of rice. The total number of synaptic connections in a human brain sits somewhere above 100 trillion. Not one of them is permanent. Fact 2. When two neurons fire together repeatedly, the link between them grows stronger. This process is called long-term potentiation. Turge Lomo first described it in detail in 1966 during experiments on rabbit hippocampal tissue. At the molecular level, repeated activation causes the receiving neuron to insert additional receptor proteins into its membrane. More receptors means greater sensitivity to the chemical signal arriving from the sending neuron. Over time, the synapse becomes more efficient. Less signal is needed to trigger a response. This is the cellular foundation of learning. It's the reason a piano passage practiced 500 times feels different from one practiced 5 times. The physical structure of the connection between those neurons has been rebuilt. Fact 3. The opposite process exists too. When synaptic connections go unused, they gradually weaken and can be eliminated entirely. Neuroscientists call this long-term depression, not the emotional state, but a measurable reduction in synaptic strength. Your brain prunes unused connections the way a gardener trims branches that no longer catch sunlight. In an adult brain, roughly 1 to 2% of synapses are swapped out each week. This ongoing turnover means the brain you have tonight is not physically identical to the brain you had 6 months ago. The overall architecture persists, but the individual connections shift and reshape themselves week after week. Fact 4. Myelin is a fatty substance that wraps around the long fibers connecting neurons. These fibers, called axons, carry electrical signals from one brain region to another. Myelin works as insulation. A myelinated axon can transmit signals up to 100 times faster than an unmyelinated one. When a particular neural pathway is used over and over, oligodendrocyte cells produce additional layers of myelin around it. The signal gets faster, more reliable. This is one reason practice skills begin to feel effortless. The pathways supporting them have been physically insulated to carry information with less resistance and less noise. Fact 5. There's a distinction between two types of neuroplasticity that matters for everything we'll discuss tonight. Functional plasticity refers to temporary shifts in neural activity. A brain region becomes more active during a specific task. For instance, structural plasticity refers to the physical remodeling of brain tissue itself. New synapses form, old ones disappear, gray matter density changes, cortical layers thicken. Functional changes can happen in minutes. Structural changes require repeated experience sustained over weeks, months, or years. The changes observed in the brains of long-term monks are predominantly structural. The tissue itself has been rebuilt. Fact 6. Dr. Charles Zucker's research on taste perception reveals something worth sitting with for a moment. The cortex contains topographic maps, organized spatial representations of sensory information. There's a region that represents sweet taste and a separate region that represents bitter taste. These maps appear hardwired, but Zucker's work shows they are shaped by learning and associative experience. A person who finds the bitterness of coffee unpleasant at first can, over time, come to experience that same bitter signal as something with positive valence, something desirable. The receptor on the tongue hasn't changed. The signal hasn't changed. What changed is how the brain interprets and values the information. Even in systems that seem fixed from birth, the brain finds ways to reshape meaning through experience. Fact 7. The concept of critical periods once dominated how scientists thought about brain development. These are windows of time, usually in early childhood, during which the brain is most responsive to certain types of input. The visual cortex, for example, needs patterned light during the first few years of life to develop properly. If that input is missing, the window closes and full visual processing may never develop. For decades, researchers believed most plasticity ended when these windows shut. That view has been revised. Adult brains retain real capacity for structural change, especially in regions tied to learning, memory, and emotional regulation. The changes are slower. They demand more repetition, but they show up clearly on scans. Fact 8. The hippocampus is one of the few brain regions where new neurons are born throughout adult life. This process, called adult neurogenesis, takes place in the dentate gyrus, a curved band of tissue within the hippocampus that helps form new memories. Studies in rodents show that enriched environments, physical exercise, and sustained learning all increase the rate of new neuron production there. The extent of adult neurogenesis in humans is still debated. but converging evidence from multiple imaging studies and post-mortem analyses suggests it continues at a reduced rate well into middle age, possibly beyond. Fact 9. The prefrontal cortex sits behind your forehead. It's the last part of the brain to fully mature, with development continuing in most people until about age 25. This region handles executive functions, planning, decision-making, impulse control, and the ability to hold multiple pieces of information in mind at the same time. It's also the region most consistently altered in long-term meditation practitioners. The fact that it matures late and stays highly plastic throughout adulthood makes it especially responsive to sustained contemplative practice. Fact 10. In 1949, Canadian psychologist Donald Hebb proposed what became one of neuroscience's most quoted rules: neurons that fire together wire together. It's a useful summary, but the full picture is more nuanced. Neurons don't simply wire together because they fire at the same time. The timing matters. The sending neuron must fire slightly before the receiving neuron, within a window of roughly 20 milliseconds, for the connection to strengthen. Reverse the order, and the connection weakens instead. This timing-dependent rule is called spike timing-dependent plasticity, and it adds precision to how your brain selects which connections deserve reinforcement. Fact 11. Glial cells outnumber neurons in the brain. For a long time, scientists treated them as passive support cells, structural scaffolding for the real players. That view has changed. Astrocytes, one type of glial cell, actively regulate what happens at the synapse. They wrap around synaptic junctions, control the concentration of chemical messengers in the gap, and release their own signaling molecules. When a synapse is strengthened through repeated use, astrocytes modify their structure to better support that connection. They aren't bystanders. They're active collaborators in the process of neural rewiring. Fact 12. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, is a protein that supports the survival, growth, and specialization of neurons. It's sometimes described as fertilizer for the brain. Levels of BDNF increase in response to physical exercise, learning, and, notably, meditation practice. Higher BDNF levels correlate with enhanced synaptic plasticity and improved memory formation. A study published in Psychoneuroendocrinology in 2017 measured elevated serum BDNF in participants who completed an 8-week mindfulness meditation program. The protein was doing what it does best, encouraging neurons to grow and connect. These first observations describe the basic machinery through which the brain rewires itself. Synapses strengthen and weaken. Myelin accumulates around well-used pathways. New neurons grow in the hippocampus. Proteins like BDNF encourage neural survival and connection. The next group of facts looks at what monks actually do with their brains during practice. The specific mental exercises that engage these cellular mechanisms hour after hour, year after year. Fact 13. Shamatha is a form of focused attention meditation practiced across many Buddhist traditions. The practitioner selects a single object of focus, often the sensation of breath entering and leaving the nostrils, and holds attention there continuously. When the mind wanders, the practitioner notices the wandering and gently returns to the breath. A single session might involve returning attention dozens or hundreds of times. This simple act, noticing distraction and choosing to redirect, engages the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and the anterior cingulate cortex. Both are central to attentional control. Over thousands of repetitions across thousands of sessions, this engagement becomes structural. The circuits get built. Fact 14. Vipassana, often translated as insight meditation or open monitoring, takes a different approach. Rather than fixing attention on one object, the practitioner observes whatever arises in consciousness without reacting to it. A sound appears, a physical sensation, a thought, an emotion. Each is noted and allowed to pass. This practice engages a broader set of brain regions, including the insula, which maps the internal state of the body, and the temporoparietal junction, which is involved in perspective taking and the awareness of where the self ends and the world begins. The neural demand here differs from shamatha. The brain learns to observe without grasping. Fact 15. Compassion meditation, known in some traditions as metta or tonglen, involves the deliberate cultivation of warmth and care toward others. In tonglen practice, the meditator visualizes taking in the suffering of another being with each inhalation and sending relief with each exhalation. Brain imaging studies of practitioners engaged in compassion meditation show increased activation in the anterior insula, the anterior cingulate cortex, and the ventral striatum, a region tied to reward and positive affect. The brain processes the imagined act of caring for others through some of the same circuits it uses to experience personal pleasure. Fact 16. Dr. Alok Kanogia emphasizes that the neural shifts produced by sustained contemplative practice are not shortcuts or hacks. He draws on his own experience, 7 years of monastic training before medical school, to describe how these changes involve replacing unhealthy neural circuits with ones that, in his words, truly serve the individual. The mechanism he describes isn't forced or imposed from outside. It arises from intrinsic motivation, a gradual turning of attention towards self-understanding that creates the conditions for deep rewiring. His perspective bridges two vocabularies, the contemplative language of monastic practice and the clinical language of psychiatry. Fact 17. A typical monastic schedule involves 4 to 8 hours of formal meditation practice each day. In some intensive retreat settings, that number rises to 10 or 12. Over a decade, a monk practicing 6 hours daily accumulates roughly 20,000 hours of deliberate mental training. This isn't passive sitting. Each hour involves the repeated engagement of attentional circuits, the continuous regulation of emotional responses, and the sustained direction of awareness towards specific internal states. The neural systems involved in this work are being activated with a frequency that few other human activities can match. Fact 18. The anterior cingulate cortex sits in a curved band along the inner surface of the frontal lobes. It plays a central role in detecting errors, monitoring conflict between competing responses, and directing attention toward relevant information. In meditators with more than 10,000 hours of practice, this region shows measurably increased thickness compared to age-matched non-meditators. The thickening reflects additional neural tissue, more cell bodies, more dendrites, more synaptic connections, built up through years of repeated use. Fact 19. The insula is a region of cortex tucked deep within the lateral sulcus, the large fissure separating the frontal and temporal lobes. Its primary function is interoception, the awareness of internal body states, heart rate, breathing rhythm, gut sensations, the felt sense of an emotion before you can name it, Experienced meditators consistently show greater insula activation and increased cortical thickness in this region. Their brains have built additional tissue dedicated to sensing what's happening inside their own bodies. And here's what's interesting. This heightened interoceptive awareness corresponds to a measurably enhanced ability to detect one's own heartbeat without touching the chest or wrist. Fact 20. Open monitoring practice changes how the brain allocates attention across competing sensory inputs. In non-meditators, attention tends to narrow and lock onto salient stimuli, a loud sound, a sudden movement, a strong emotion. This is called attentional capture, and it served our ancestors well in environments full of physical threats. In experienced open monitoring practitioners, the brain distributes attention more evenly across the sensory field. EEG recordings show a broader, more diffuse pattern of cortical activation, as though the brain has learned to hold a wider view without collapsing its focus onto any single element. Fact 21. The concept of decentering appears in both contemplative literature and clinical psychology. It describes the ability to observe your own thoughts and emotions as passing events rather than as defining features of who you are. A person experiencing anxiety, for instance, might normally feel consumed by the anxious thought, identified with it, unable to separate themselves from the content of their mind. Decentering is the capacity to notice the thought as just a thought, a pattern of neural activity, not a fact about the world. Long-term meditation practice strengthens the neural circuits that support this capacity, particularly connections between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. Fact 22. The amygdala is an almond-shaped cluster of nuclei located deep within the temporal lobes. It plays a central role in processing threat-related information and generating fear responses. In people who have practiced meditation for several years, the amygdala shows reduced reactivity to emotionally provocative stimuli. Brain scans taken while subjects viewed disturbing images show a muted amygdala response in experienced meditators compared to matched controls. The threat detection system is still functional. It hasn't been disabled, but its threshold for activation has shifted upward. It takes a more potent signal to trip the alarm. Fact 23. The vagus nerve is the longest cranial nerve in the body. It runs from the brainstem down through the neck, chest, and abdomen. It serves as the primary communication channel between the brain and the internal organs. When the vagus nerve increases its activity, heart rate slows, breathing deepens, and inflammatory responses decrease. This is called vagal tone, and it's one of the most reliable physiological markers of the body's capacity to recover from stress. Long-term meditators consistently show higher resting vagal tone than non-meditators. Their bodies are, at baseline, in a calmer physiological state. Fact 24. Monastic life involves more than formal meditation sessions. The daily routine typically includes periods of walking meditation, mindful eating, manual labor performed with deliberate attention, and chanting or recitation of texts. Each of these activities engages overlapping but distinct neural circuits. Walking meditation combines attentional focus with motor coordination and proprioceptive awareness. Mindful eating involves interoceptive monitoring, taste processing, and the deliberate regulation of the impulse to eat quickly. The monastic environment is designed so that nearly every waking hour involves some form of attentional training. It's a full immersion program for the brain. Fact 25. Dr. K describes a process he calls the resolution of ego-driven conflicts as a mechanism for deep neural change. In his framework, many of the thought patterns that cause psychological suffering, rumination, comparison, self-criticism, are maintained by neural circuits that reinforce a rigid self-concept. Monastic practice over time loosens the grip of these circuits, not through suppression, not through denial, through repeated observation. The practitioner watches the thought arise, watches it persist, watches it fade, hundreds of times, thousands of times, and gradually the circuits that maintain the pattern lose their hold. The brain allocates less energy to them. New pathways form in their place. These first observations describe what monks do and how neural change begins at the cellular level. The next group of facts examines what researchers find when they place experienced meditators inside brain scanners and record images of the living brain at work. Fact 26. In 2005, Sarah Lazar and colleagues at Massachusetts General Hospital published one of the first studies to show structural brain differences in meditation practitioners. Using magnetic resonance imaging, they found that experienced meditators had increased cortical thickness in the prefrontal cortex and the right anterior insula compared to non-meditators. The differences were most pronounced in older participants, suggesting that meditation may offset the natural cortical thinning that accompanies aging. The study included 20 practitioners with an average of 9 years of meditation experience, and a control group matched for age, gender, and education. Fact 27. Gray matter refers to regions of the brain dense with neuronal cell bodies, dendrites, and synapses. White matter refers to regions dominated by myelinated axons, the long fibers connecting distant brain areas. When researchers report increased gray matter density in meditators, they're describing regions where additional neural tissue has been constructed. A 2009 study by Eileen Luders at UCLA found greater gray matter volumes in the right orbitofrontal cortex, the right hippocampus, and the left inferior temporal gyrus of long-term meditators. These are regions involved in emotional regulation, memory formation, and sensory integration. Fact 28. The default mode network is a set of brain regions that become active when a person isn't focused on any particular external task. It's the network of mind-wandering, daydreaming, and self-referential thought. Its major nodes include the medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate cortex, and the angular gyrus. In experienced meditators, the default mode network shows reduced activity during rest and reduced connectivity between its nodes. The mind-wandering system is quieter. This doesn't mean it's absent. It means the brain has learned to engage it less automatically, to let the mind settle rather than spin. Fact 29. Functional connectivity refers to the degree to which activity in one brain region correlates with activity in another. When two regions consistently activate together, they're said to be functionally connected. Long-term meditators show increased functional connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and the insula, between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, and between the anterior cingulate cortex and the somatosensory cortex. These enhanced connections reflect a brain that has built stronger bridges between regions responsible for attention, body awareness, and emotional regulation. Fact 30. Diffusion tensor imaging is a type of brain scan that maps the white matter tracks connecting different brain regions. It measures how water molecules diffuse along axonal fibers. When diffusion is highly directional, it indicates well-organized, densely myelinated pathways. Studies using this technique on experienced meditators have found increased fractional anisotropy, a measure of white matter integrity, in the corona radiata and the superior longitudinal fasciculus. These tracks connect the frontal cortex to posterior brain regions involved in attention and sensory processing. The insulation along these pathways is thicker, more organized, built for speed. Fact 31. The temporoparietal junction sits at the boundary between the temporal and parietal lobes. It plays a key role in distinguishing between self-generated thoughts and external stimuli, and in the ability to take another person's perspective. In compassion meditation practitioners, this region shows both increased activation during practice and increased gray matter density at rest. The brain has built additional tissue in a region specifically involved in understanding what other people are thinking and feeling. Fact 32. Cortical gyrification refers to the degree of folding in the surface of the brain. A more folded cortex has greater surface area packed into the same volume, which typically correlates with enhanced information processing. A 2012 study by Luters and colleagues found that long-term meditators had noticeably greater gyrification than non-meditators, particularly in the left precentral gyrus, the right fusiform gyrus, and the right cuneus. The folds were deeper, the surface more intricate. The brain had physically restructured its outer surface over the course of years of practice. Fact 33. The hippocampus handles the conversion of short-term memories into long-term memories and contributes to spatial navigation. It's also one of the brain regions most vulnerable to chronic stress. Sustained elevation of the stress hormone cortisol causes hippocampal neurons to atrophy and pull back their dendritic branches. In long-term meditators, the hippocampus tends to be larger and better preserved than in age-matched non-meditators. The stress reduction that comes with meditation practice appears to protect this structure from the cumulative damage that cortisol would otherwise inflict over decades. Fact 34. Resting state functional MRI measures brain activity when a person lies in the scanner doing nothing in particular. It reveals the brain's intrinsic patterns, the baseline rhythms that persist when no task is being performed. In experienced meditators, resting state scans show a distinctive configuration: reduced activity in the default mode network, increased connectivity between the executive control network and the salience network, and a more stable pattern of activity overall. The resting brain of a long-term meditator is arranged differently from a non-meditator's brain, even when neither person is meditating. Fact 35. The salience network is anchored by the anterior insula and the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. Its job is to detect relevant stimuli, both internal and external, and to switch the brain's processing resources between internally directed thought and externally directed attention. In experienced meditators, the salience network shows enhanced function and better coordination with other large-scale brain networks. The brain is more efficient at recognizing what deserves attention and directing resources accordingly. Less wasted processing, more precise allocation. Fact 36. A 2011 study at Yale University, led by Judson Brewer, found that experienced meditators showed reduced activity in the medial prefrontal cortex and the posterior cingulate cortex across multiple meditation styles. Both regions are core nodes of the default mode network. The reduction was present during focused attention, open monitoring, and loving kindness practice alike. This suggested that the quieting of the self-referential system wasn't specific to one technique, but was a shared effect of sustained contemplative practice in general. Different methods, same neural outcome. Fact 37. When researchers compare the brains of monks with 30,000 or more hours of practice to those of people who have recently learned to meditate, the structural differences are consistent in direction, but vary in size. The cortical thickness differences in the prefrontal cortex, for example, tend to be more pronounced in practitioners with more cumulative hours. This dose-response relationship, more practice producing more structural change, is one of the strongest pieces of evidence that the observed differences are caused by meditation rather than by pre-existing traits that might draw a person toward monastic life in the first place. Fact 38. Brain age estimation is a technique in which machine learning algorithms analyze structural MRI scans and estimate the biological age of the brain based on patterns of cortical thickness, gray matter volume, and white matter integrity. Several research teams have applied this technique to long-term meditators and found that their estimated brain age is younger than their actual chronological age. In one study of 50 meditators with an average age of 50, the estimated brain age came in at approximately 7.5 years younger than expected. Those brains showed less of the structural decline typically associated with getting older. Fact 39. The nucleus accumbens, located deep within the basal forebrain, is a key node in the brain's reward circuitry. It responds to dopamine signals and plays a role in motivation, pleasure, and reinforcement learning. During compassion meditation, experienced practitioners show increased activation in the nucleus accumbens. The act of deliberately generating care for others activates some of the same reward circuits that respond to food, social connection, and other biologically meaningful rewards. Your brain treats compassion as something worth pursuing. The reward signal is real. Fact 40. Here's the thing about the research so far. Specific neuroimaging comparisons between monastic populations and carefully matched laypeople remain limited. Most studies compare experienced meditators, some monastic, some not, with non-meditating controls. The monastic practitioners who have participated in imaging studies tend to have the most extreme practice histories: 20,000, 40,000, even 60,000 cumulative hours. These individuals represent the far end of the distribution. The data from these practitioners points in a clear direction, but the full map is still being drawn. Small sample sizes and the difficulty of matching monastic lifestyles with lay controls mean the findings should be held with appropriate care. Fact 41. The electroencephalogram, or EEG, measures electrical activity at the scalp using small electrodes placed across the head. It captures the summed activity of millions of neurons firing in synchrony. Different patterns are classified into frequency bands: delta waves below 4 Hz, theta between 4 and 8, alpha between 8 and 13, beta between 13 and 30, and gamma above 30 Hz. Each band is associated with different cognitive and physiological states. Delta dominates deep sleep. Alpha appears during relaxed wakefulness. Gamma is associated with heightened awareness and the integration of information across distant brain regions. Fact 42. In 2004, Anton Lutz and colleagues published a landmark study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. They recorded EEG activity from 8 Tibetan Buddhist monks, each with between 10,000 and 50,000 hours of meditation practice. During compassion meditation, these monks produced sustained high-amplitude gamma oscillations between 25 and 42 hertz. The amplitude of those gamma waves was the highest ever recorded in healthy human subjects. And the pattern wasn't a brief burst. It was sustained for the entire duration of the meditation session. Fact 43. Gamma oscillations are thought to reflect the binding of information across different brain regions into a unified conscious experience. When you see a red ball rolling across a table, color is processed in one region, shape in another, motion in a third. Gamma waves are believed to synchronize these separate processing streams into a single coherent perception. In the experienced monks Lutz studied, gamma activity during compassion meditation was synchronized across a wide swath of the cortex. Frontal, parietal, and temporal regions were all oscillating together in a coordinated rhythm that is rarely observed outside of these populations. Fact 44. The ratio of gamma activity to slower frequency bands, particularly theta waves, changes with cumulative meditation practice. In beginners, the resting EEG is typically dominated by alpha and theta rhythms, with relatively modest gamma activity. In practitioners with more than 10,000 hours of cumulative practice, the ratio shifts. Gamma becomes more prominent, even during rest periods between meditation sessions. The brain's baseline electrical state itself has been recalibrated. The default mode of oscillation is different, and it stays different. Fact 45. Novice meditators who are given a brief compassion meditation instruction also show some increase in gamma activity, but the gap is vast. In Lutz's 2004 study, novice practitioners showed a modest gamma increase concentrated in a few frontal electrodes. The experienced monks showed gamma amplitudes roughly 25 to 30 times higher, distributed across the entire cortex. That's the difference between a few weeks of practice and several decades. It's visible in the raw electrical signals. Fact 46. Alpha waves, oscillating between 8 and 13 hertz, are associated with relaxed wakefulness, the state you enter when you close your eyes and allow your mind to settle without focusing on anything specific. In experienced meditators practicing focused attention, alpha activity increases in posterior brain regions, particularly over the occipital and parietal cortex. This increase reflects a deliberate calming of visual and sensory processing. The brain is reducing its responsiveness to external input to sustain internal focus. Fact 47. Theta waves, oscillating between 4 and 8 hertz, are prominent during light sleep and during states of deep internal focus. They're also observed during meditation, particularly in the frontal midline region. Frontal midline theta is thought to reflect activity in the anterior cingulate cortex and medial prefrontal cortex, regions involved in attention monitoring and emotional regulation. Long-term meditators produce stronger and more sustained frontal midline theta during practice than novices. Some researchers describe this pattern as a signature of concentrated internal attention. Fact 48. Neural coherence refers to the degree to which different brain regions oscillate in synchrony. When two regions show high coherence, their electrical rhythms are aligned in time. They're communicating more efficiently, with less noise between them. Experienced meditators show increased coherence between frontal and parietal regions during focused attention practice. The attentional control areas in the front of the brain and the sensory integration areas in the back are working in tighter coordination. The signal between them is cleaner. Fact 49. Eventrelated potentials are brief voltage changes in the EEG that occur in response to specific stimuli. The P300, for example, is a positive voltage peak that appears roughly 300 milliseconds after an unexpected stimulus. It reflects the brain's allocation of attention to novel information. Studies have shown that experienced meditators produce larger P300 amplitudes and faster latencies than non-meditators. The brain is quicker to notice what's new and dedicates more resources to evaluating it. Attention has been sharpened at the electrical level. Fact 50. During meditation, some experienced practitioners enter states in which the normal distinction between fast and slow brain rhythms breaks down. Simultaneous high-amplitude activity in both gamma and theta bands has been recorded, a pattern that is uncommon in typical waking states. Some researchers have proposed that this co-occurrence reflects a state in which deep relaxation and heightened awareness coexist. The brain is simultaneously calm and alert, quiet and engaged. This dual-state pattern may be one of the neurophysiological markers of what contemplative traditions describe as open, effortless awareness. Fact 51. Long-range gamma synchrony, the coordination of gamma rhythms across brain regions separated by many centimeters, is thought to require highly myelinated axonal pathways that can transmit signals quickly enough to maintain phase alignment across distance. The fact that experienced monks produce such strong long-range gamma synchrony is consistent with the structural findings from diffusion tensor imaging showing enhanced white matter integrity in these practitioners. The electrical patterns and the physical wiring tell the same story. Fact 52. Sleep spindles are brief bursts of oscillatory activity between 11 and 16 Hz that occur during stage 2 of non-REM sleep. They're generated by interactions between the thalamus and the cortex, and they play a role in memory consolidation and the protection of sleep from disruption by external sounds. The density of sleep spindles, how many occur per minute, has been correlated with fluid intelligence in some research. Preliminary data suggests that long-term meditators may show altered spindle characteristics, though this area of study is still in its early stages. Fact 53. The P200 component of the eventrelated potential occurs approximately 200 milliseconds after a stimulus and reflects early perceptual processing. In a study comparing experienced Zen meditators with non-meditating controls, the meditators showed a reduced P200 response to repeated stimuli. They habituated more quickly. Their brains spent less energy processing information that had already been evaluated. This is consistent with the contemplative concept of equanimity, meeting recurring experiences without renewed reactivity each time. Fact 54. Magnetoencephalography, or MEG, measures the magnetic fields produced by electrical currents in the brain. It offers millisecond-level temporal resolution combined with reasonable spatial localization. MEG studies of experienced meditators have confirmed the EEG findings of enhanced gamma activity and have further localized the sources to specific cortical regions, including the medial prefrontal cortex, the insula, and the somatosensory cortex. The magnetic signatures of these oscillations are strong and spatially widespread. Fact 55. The brain's electrical activity isn't random noise. It reflects the coordinated behavior of neural populations, thousands or millions of neurons oscillating together in rhythmic patterns. What meditation practice appears to do over many years is shift the default rhythm, the baseline, the starting point from which the brain operates when nothing in particular is demanded of it. In experienced monks, that baseline includes more gamma, more coherence, and less unstructured noise. The brain at rest isn't idle. It's organized differently, tuned to a different frequency. These observations describe what happens in the meditating brain during waking hours. The next facts explore how these changes follow practitioners into sleep. Fact 56. Sleep is divided into stages that cycle roughly every 90 minutes. Stage 1 is a light transitional state. Stage 2 features sleep spindles and K-complexes. Stages 3 and 4 constitute slow-wave sleep, the deepest phase of non-REM sleep, characterized by large, slow delta oscillations below 4 Hz. REM sleep, in which most vivid dreaming occurs, follows. A typical night includes 4 to 6 complete cycles. The proportion of each stage shifts as the night progresses. More slow-wave sleep in the first half, more REM in the second half. Fact 57. Long-term meditators show alterations in sleep architecture that set them apart from non-meditating populations. Several studies have reported increased slow-wave sleep in experienced practitioners, deeper descent into the restorative phases of non-REM sleep. Slow-wave sleep is the phase during which the brain performs much of its synaptic maintenance, pruning unused connections, strengthening important ones, consolidating memories from the day. More time in this phase may mean more efficient neural housekeeping. Fact 58. REM latency is the time between sleep onset and the first episode of REM sleep. In most adults, REM latency falls between 70 and 100 minutes. Some studies of long-term meditators have found shortened REM latency, meaning the brain enters its first REM period sooner. The full significance of this isn't yet understood, but it may reflect a nervous system that transitions between sleep stages more efficiently, spending less time in lighter transitional phases before reaching the deeper, more active stages of the cycle. Fact 59. Some experienced monks report needing fewer hours of sleep while maintaining full cognitive performance during waking hours. This observation is anecdotal and hard to verify in controlled conditions, but it's been reported consistently across multiple contemplative traditions over centuries. One possible explanation is that the deep restfulness achieved during meditation, particularly in states associated with theta and delta range brain activity, partially substitutes for the restorative functions normally performed during sleep. The brain may enter a sleep-like maintenance state during meditation itself. Fact 60. Slow oscillations during deep sleep aren't just passive quieting of brain activity. They're coordinated waves of silence and reactivation that sweep across the cortex. During the up state of a slow oscillation, large populations of neurons fire together. During the down state, they fall silent. This rhythmic alternation is thought to support the transfer of memories from the hippocampus, where they're initially stored, to the cortex, where they settle into long-term storage. Meditation practice may enhance the coherence and regularity of these slow oscillations, making the memory consolidation process more efficient during the hours after practice. Fact 61. The autonomic nervous system operates largely outside conscious control. It has two major branches. The sympathetic branch prepares the body for action, increasing heart rate, dilating pupils, redirecting blood flow to muscles. The parasympathetic branch supports rest, digestion, and recovery. In most people, the balance between these two branches shifts automatically in response to environmental demands. In long-term meditators, the balance tilts toward parasympathetic dominance at baseline. Their resting heart rate is lower. Their breathing is slower. Their bodies operate in a calmer physiological state even when they're not meditating. Fact 62. Dr. K and other researchers have noted that the neural circuits involved in desire, attachment, and emotional regulation overlap substantially with the circuits reshaped by meditation practice. The autonomic nervous system, which drives the physical sensations of longing, craving, anxiety, and comfort, is itself a target of contemplative training. When a monk practices equanimity toward arising desires, observing the sensation of wanting without acting on it, the autonomic response pattern gradually shifts. The sympathetic surge that accompanies craving becomes less intense over months and years of this kind of observation. Fact 63. Cortisol, the primary stress hormone in humans, follows a circadian rhythm. Levels peak in the early morning and decline throughout the day, reaching their lowest point around midnight. Chronic stress disrupts this rhythm, keeping cortisol elevated beyond its normal windows. Sustained cortisol elevation interferes with sleep onset, reduces slow-wave sleep duration, and impairs hippocampal function. Multiple studies have found that regular meditation practice helps normalize the cortisol rhythm, returning the daily pattern to its natural shape and reducing overall cortisol output across the 24-hour cycle. Fact 64. Melatonin is a hormone produced by the pineal gland in response to darkness. It signals to the brain and body that nighttime has arrived and that sleep-related processes should begin. Some studies have found that meditation practice, particularly evening meditation, increases melatonin levels. One small study measured a fourfold increase in urinary melatonin metabolites following evening meditation in experienced practitioners. If confirmed in larger samples, this would suggest that meditation directly enhances the hormonal signal that promotes sleep onset, your body's own chemical invitation to rest. Fact 65. Hypnagogic imagery refers to the vivid images, sounds, and sensations that sometimes occur at the boundary between wakefulness and sleep. Most people pass through this zone too quickly to notice much. Long-term meditators report experiencing hypnagogic imagery more frequently and in greater detail. This may reflect enhanced awareness of the transitional states between waking and sleeping, a heightened ability to observe the mind's activity during a phase that most of us simply drift through without registering. Fact 66. Lucid dreaming, the awareness that one is dreaming while still within the dream, occurs more frequently in experienced meditators. A 2015 survey study found that meditation practitioners reported lucid dreams roughly twice as often as non-meditators. The capacity for meta-awareness, the ability to observe your own mental state, is central to both meditation practice and lucid dreaming. The same neural circuits that allow a meditator to notice, "I am distracted," during practice, may also allow a dreamer to notice, "I am dreaming," during sleep. Fact 67. Yoga Nidra, sometimes called yogic sleep, is a meditation practice performed lying down that guides the practitioner through a state between waking and sleeping. EEG recordings during Yoga Nidra show a mixture of alpha, theta, and delta activity, a pattern that resembles some features of stage 1 and stage 2 sleep, while the practitioner reports maintaining conscious awareness. This state has been described as a form of sleep-like rest with preserved awareness. It may represent a distinct neurophysiological condition that combines elements of both sleep and meditation in a way that's hard to classify neatly. Fact 68. The glymphatic system is a recently discovered waste clearance pathway in the brain. During sleep, particularly during slow-wave sleep, the spaces between brain cells expand by approximately 60%. This expansion allows cerebrospinal fluid to flush through the tissue and carry away metabolic waste products, including beta amyloid, a protein associated with Alzheimer's disease. The enhanced slow-wave sleep observed in long-term meditators may improve glymphatic function, providing more thorough clearance of these toxic metabolites. The brain cleans itself more thoroughly when it sleeps more deeply. Fact 69. In Western psychology, the ego is generally understood as the conscious sense of self, the I that plans, remembers, evaluates, and narrates the story of your life. In Eastern contemplative traditions, the concept carries a different weight. The ego is viewed as a constructed pattern of identification, a habitual tendency to define the self through thoughts, preferences, memories, and social roles. Dr. K describes the distinction this way. Western psychiatry tends to strengthen the ego so that it functions effectively in the world. Monastic practice aims to see through the ego, to recognize it as a construction rather than a fixed reality. Fact 70. The medial prefrontal cortex is one of the brain regions most consistently associated with self-referential processing. When you think about your own personality traits, your past experiences, your future plans, this region activates. It's a core node of the default mode network and is more active during mind wandering and introspection than during externally focused tasks. In experienced meditators, activity in the medial prefrontal cortex is reduced during both meditation and rest. The neural substrate of self-referential thought is quieter, not gone, just less dominant. Fact 71. The posterior cingulate cortex is another core node of the default mode network. It's involved in the felt sense of being a subject, the experience of I am here, perceiving this. Judson Brewer's research at Yale showed that experienced meditators had notably reduced activity in this region compared to novices. Brewer suggested that this reduction corresponds to the contemplative experience described as a dropping away of the sense of self, not a loss of consciousness. A softening of the boundary between the observer and what is being observed. Fact 72. Self-referential processing consumes a substantial portion of the brain's energy budget. The default mode network, which supports much of this processing, accounts for a meaningful fraction of total metabolic activity. In experienced meditators, the reduced engagement of this network means metabolic resources are freed for other functions. The brain is spending less energy on the continuous narration of self-related thoughts, more energy on present moment processing. It's a reallocation, a shift in where the brain directs its finite supply of glucose and oxygen. Fact 73. Rumination, the repetitive, circular revisiting of negative thoughts, is one of the strongest predictors of depression. It involves the sustained activation of default mode network circuits, particularly the medial prefrontal cortex and the posterior cingulate cortex. The neural effects of long-term meditation directly oppose the neural patterns of rumination. By quieting default mode network activity and strengthening connections between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, meditation practice builds the circuits that interrupt ruminative loops and redirect attention toward what's actually happening right now, in this moment, rather than what happened last week or what might happen tomorrow. Fact 74. Dr. K describes the process of ego dissolution in monastic practice not as a loss but as a reorganization. The monk doesn't lose awareness of who they are. They gain a different relationship with that awareness. The thought, I am a person with these qualities and this history, can still arise, but it's held more lightly. It's recognized as one pattern of neural activity among many, rather than as a fundamental truth about reality. This shift from identification with thoughts to observation of thoughts corresponds to measurable changes in the connectivity between the default mode network and the executive control network. The wiring changes. Fact 75. Mirror neurons are cells that fire both when an organism performs an action and when it observes another organism performing the same action. First described in macaque monkeys in the early 1990s, they've been proposed as a neural mechanism for empathy and social understanding. Their existence and role in humans is still debated, but the broader principle they illustrate is well supported. The brain uses overlapping circuits for self-experience and other experience. Compassion meditation practice may strengthen these overlapping circuits, blurring the neural boundary between what you feel and what you perceive others feeling. Fact 76. The experience of flow, total absorption, in an activity to the point where self-awareness recedes and time seems to move differently, shares neural features with meditation states. Both involve reduced activity in the default mode network and increased synchronization between the prefrontal cortex and task-relevant sensory areas. Some researchers have proposed that long-term meditation practice makes flow states more accessible. By training the brain to quiet the self-referential system on demand, practitioners can more readily enter states of complete, unself-conscious engagement with whatever they're doing. Fact 77. Neural habituation is the process by which the brain's response to a repeated stimulus decreases over time. You stop noticing the hum of a refrigerator after a few minutes. Experienced meditators show faster habituation to emotionally neutral stimuli but slower habituation to stimuli requiring active attention. Their brains are more efficient at filtering out irrelevant information while maintaining responsiveness to what matters. This selective pattern reflects a refined attentional system, one shaped by years of deliberate practice in noticing what's present and releasing what isn't needed. Fact 78. The narrative self is the aspect of self-awareness that constructs a continuous story across time, linking memories of the past to plans for the future into a coherent identity. The experiential self is the awareness of what's happening right now, the raw sensation of being alive in this moment, without reference to yesterday or tomorrow. These two modes are supported by partially distinct neural circuits. The narrative self relies heavily on the default mode network. The experiential self engages the insula and the somatosensory cortex. Meditation practice shifts the balance, less narrative, more experience. Fact 79. Brain regions that process social pain, the distress of rejection, exclusion, or loss, overlap with regions that process physical pain. The dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insula are active during both. This overlap means that social suffering is, in a neurological sense, a form of physical hurt. Compassion meditation, which engages these same regions in the context of deliberately cultivated care, may reconfigure the brain's relationship with social pain, not eliminating the sensitivity, but shifting the interpretive framework from personal distress to empathic concern. Fact 80. The concept of neuroplastic identity sits at the intersection of neuroscience and contemplative philosophy. Who you are is continuously being shaped by what you repeatedly do, think, and practice. Every repetition of a thought pattern strengthens the circuits that produce it. Every moment of sustained attention builds the architecture of attentional control. The monks who sit for decades aren't merely doing something, they're becoming something. The practice and the practitioner converge into a single, slowly evolving neural structure, and this convergence never truly finishes. Fact 81. Ji-Tummo is a meditation practice from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition that involves the deliberate generation of internal heat. Practitioners visualize flames rising along the central axis of the body while performing specific breathing techniques. Under controlled laboratory conditions, researchers have measured skin temperature increases of 8 to 10 degrees Celsius on the fingers and toes of experienced Ji-Tummo practitioners. In a 2013 study published in PLOS One, monks practicing Ji-Tummo in a cold room were able to raise their peripheral body temperature enough to dry wet sheets wrapped around their bodies. The sheets steamed in the cold air. Fact 82. The mechanism behind Ji-Tummo appears to involve voluntary activation of brown adipose tissue, a type of fat that generates heat through a process called non-shivering thermogenesis. Brown adipose tissue is typically activated automatically in response to cold exposure. The ability to activate it voluntarily, through mental imagery and breathing techniques alone, suggests that the autonomic circuits controlling heat production can be brought under conscious influence through sustained contemplative training. The boundary between what you can control and what your body handles on its own is more permeable than most people assume. Fact 83. Wim Hof, a Dutch practitioner known for extreme cold exposure, has demonstrated some similar physiological capabilities. While Hof isn't a monk in the traditional sense, his training methods share elements with Tibetan breathing practices. A 2014 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found that Hof and a group of trained participants could voluntarily suppress their innate immune response to endotoxin injection through specific breathing and meditation techniques. The immune system responded to conscious intention. This suggests that the autonomic regulatory capacities developed in contemplative practice can be transferred, at least partially, to motivated learners outside monastic settings. Fact 84. Pain perception involves two distinct neural components. The sensory discriminative component, processed primarily in the somatosensory cortex, encodes the location, intensity, and quality of a painful stimulus. The affective motivational component, processed in the anterior cingulate cortex, and the insula, generates the unpleasant emotional experience of pain, the suffering that accompanies the sensation. Long-term meditators show a distinctive pattern during pain experiments. Their sensory discriminative processing remains intact or even increases, while their affective motivational response decreases. They feel the pain more precisely, but they suffer from it less. Fact 85. Heart rate variability is the variation in time between successive heartbeats. It's a measure of autonomic flexibility. Higher heart rate variability indicates a nervous system that can rapidly shift between sympathetic and parasympathetic states, adapting fluidly to changing demands. Long-term meditators consistently show higher resting heart rate variability than age-matched controls. Their autonomic nervous systems are more flexible, more responsive, and more capable of rapid recovery from disruption. Fact 86. Breathing rate in experienced meditators during practice typically drops to between 4 and 6 breaths per minute. That's roughly half the normal resting rate of 12 to 20 breaths per minute. This slowed breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system through baroreceptor reflexes in the lungs and aortic arch. The reduced breathing rate isn't forced. In experienced practitioners, it occurs naturally as the body settles. The respiratory system and the nervous system calibrate together, finding a rhythm that serves both rest and awareness. Fact 87. The enteric nervous system, sometimes called the second brain, consists of approximately 500 million neurons embedded in the walls of the gastrointestinal tract. It communicates bidirectionally with the central nervous system through the vagus nerve. The gut-brain axis has become an active area of research in the last decade. Meditation practice, through its effects on vagal tone and parasympathetic activation, influences gastrointestinal function. Some studies have reported reduced symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome and other functional digestive disorders in regular meditators. Fact 88. Voluntary pupil dilation, the ability to change pupil size without a change in ambient light, has been observed in a small number of highly experienced contemplative practitioners. Normally, pupil diameter is controlled entirely by the autonomic nervous system, adjusting automatically to light levels and emotional arousal. The ability to influence this response voluntarily suggests that sustained meditation practice can extend conscious control into autonomic circuits that are typically beyond awareness. Most people would never think to try. These practitioners can do it. Fact 89. Blood pressure in long-term meditators tends to be lower than in age-matched, non-meditating populations. A meta-analysis published in the American Journal of Hypertension in 2008 found that transcendental meditation practice was associated with a reduction in systolic blood pressure of approximately 5 millimeters of mercury and diastolic pressure of about 3 millimeters of mercury. These reductions are modest at the individual level but clinically meaningful across populations. Lower blood pressure means less strain on blood vessels, less work for the heart, and reduced risk of stroke and cardiovascular disease over a lifetime. Fact 90. The immune system and the nervous system communicate through shared chemical messengers, cytokines, neuropeptides, and hormones that influence both neural activity and immune function. Chronic stress suppresses immune function by maintaining elevated cortisol and sustained sympathetic activation. The stress-reducing effects of meditation practice have downstream consequences for how the immune system operates. A 2003 study by Richard Davidson and colleagues found that participants who completed an 8-week mindfulness meditation program showed a notably greater antibody response to influenza vaccination compared to a wait-list control group. Their immune systems mounted a stronger defense. Fact 91. Telomeres are protective caps on the ends of chromosomes that shorten with each cell division. They're considered a marker of biological aging. Telomerase is the enzyme that rebuilds them. A 2011 study led by Clifford Sarin found that participants in a 3-month intensive meditation retreat showed higher telomerase activity than a matched control group. This suggests that sustained meditation practice may influence the molecular machinery of cellular aging, not halting the process, but perhaps slowing its pace. Fact 92. The integration of autonomic, immune, and endocrine changes with the structural and electrical brain changes described earlier paints a picture of a practice that reshapes the entire organism. The brain changes. The nervous system changes. The body changes. These aren't separate processes. They're interconnected through the same neural circuits that link the prefrontal cortex to the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland, and the pituitary to the adrenals and the thyroid. Contemplative practice engages the whole axis. The whole system adapts. These observations describe what happens inside the brains and bodies of individual practitioners. The final group of facts places neuroplasticity in a wider biological context, across the full span of a human life and beyond. Fact 93. Dr. Tony Wiscore's research at Stanford has demonstrated that systemic factors, proteins circulating in the blood, can reactivate brain stem cells and restore memory function in aging organisms. In parabiosis experiments, where the circulatory systems of a young mouse and an old mouse are surgically joined, the older mouse's brain shows increased stem cell activity, reduced inflammation, and improved memory. The brain, even in old age, remains responsive to chemical signals from the body's internal environment. Neuroplasticity isn't only driven by experience, it's also driven by biology's broader chemistry. Fact 94. Adult neurogenesis in the hippocampus continues throughout the lifespan, though at a declining rate. In aging organisms, the rate of new neuron production can be partially restored by environmental enrichment, physical exercise, caloric restriction, and exposure to young blood-borne factors. These findings suggest that the brain's capacity for self-renewal never fully ceases. It diminishes, it slows, but it persists, and it can be reawakened by the right combination of signals. The brain at 70 is not the brain at 20, but it isn't finished growing either. Fact 95. Monastic communities provide a kind of natural laboratory for studying lifelong neuroplastic change. Practitioners in their 70s and 80s who have maintained consistent meditation practice for decades offer a window into what sustained neural training produces over the full arc of a human life. While formal imaging studies of very elderly monastics are rare, the behavioral observations are striking. Preserved cognitive function, sustained attentional capacity, emotional stability, and social engagement at ages when many non-practitioners experience notable cognitive decline. Fact 96. The social environment of a monastery may itself contribute to neuroplasticity. Social connection, meaningful daily activity, a structured routine, reduced exposure to chronic stressors, and a diet that's typically simple and consistent. All of these environmental factors are independently associated with better brain health in aging populations. Meditation practice doesn't occur in a vacuum. It occurs within a context that supports neural maintenance from multiple directions at once. Fact 97. Empathy circuits in the brain, particularly those involving the anterior insula and the anterior cingulate cortex, continue to reshape with experience throughout adulthood. The capacity for emotional resonance with others isn't fixed in childhood. It's modified by every meaningful relationship, every act of care, every practice of deliberate compassion. In monks who have spent decades cultivating compassion meditation, these circuits are among the most structurally altered. The brain has built additional tissue, specifically dedicated to understanding and sharing the emotional states of other beings. Fact 98. The convergence of contemplative tradition and modern neuroscience isn't a merging of two worldviews. They remain distinct in method, language, and purpose, but they describe the same phenomenon from different vantage points. Contemplative practitioners observed centuries ago that sustained mental training changes the quality of consciousness. Neuroscientists now observe that the same training changes the physical structure of the brain. Both descriptions are accurate. Both are incomplete. Together, they offer a more detailed picture than either could provide alone. Fact 99. The nervous system has been reorganizing itself for as long as nervous systems have existed. The first neurons appeared in organisms like jellyfish and sea anemones roughly 600 million years ago. Simple nerve nets that coordinated movement in response to touch or light. Over hundreds of millions of years, these networks grew more complex, aggregating into ganglia, brain stems, cerebral cortices. At every stage, plasticity was the mechanism of adaptation. The capacity of neural tissue to reshape itself in response to experience isn't a recent development. It's as old as neurons themselves. Fact 100. And tonight, as you rest, your brain isn't idle. It's doing what it has always done, pruning connections that served you yesterday but are no longer needed, strengthening pathways that you use today and will need again tomorrow, moving memories from temporary storage in the hippocampus to their longer-term homes across the cortex, flushing metabolic waste through the glymphatic channels that expand during sleep. The same slow processes that built coral reefs on the ocean floor and carved river valleys through stone are at work inside your skull right now. One synapse at a time, one connection at a time. The brain reshapes itself in stillness. And that is, perhaps, the quietest truth in all of neuroscience. The most profound changes don't require force. They don't require speed. They require only repetition, patience, and time. The monks understood this before brain scanners confirmed it. Sit still, pay attention, return when the mind wanders, do this again tomorrow, and the day after, and the year after that. The tissue adapts, the circuits shift, the resting state recalibrates. Not because the brain was told to change, but because it was given the conditions in which change naturally occurs. Those same conditions are present right now. As your breathing slows, your muscles soften, and the electrical rhythms of your cortex begin their nightly descent towards slower and deeper oscillations. Delta waves will arrive soon. Large, slow undulations of electrical silence and reactivation, sweeping across the surface of your cortex like tides moving across a shallow sea. The brain has been doing this for 600 million years. In sea creatures with nerve nets no more complex than a mesh of thread. In ancient fish navigating dark ocean floors. In early mammals sheltering in burrows while larger animals moved overhead. In every human who has ever lived. Tonight it does it again. The same slow plasticity. The same quiet work of maintenance and renewal. The same reshaping of connections that occurs in a monastery on the far side of the world is happening in your brain right now. And you don't need to do anything at all. Just rest. The brain knows what to do in stillness. It has always known.